Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Friday, January 14th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Notre Dame game is in 232 days, the game against Michigan in 317 days. Ryan Day made some very big changes to the Ohio State football coaching staff on Thursday. Linebackers coach Al Washington is out, as is former defensive coordinator Kerry Coombs. And in their place are former Cincinnati defensive backs coach Perry Eliano and reportedly former Buckeye captain and longtime NFL assistant Tim Walton. That one is not signed, sealed, and delivered yet, but it sounds like it could be on the way. Add to that the swap of Justin Frye for Greg Studrawa on the offensive line earlier in the week, and it has been an eventful few days inside the walls of the Woody. So what will that all mean for recruiting? My guest today is Buckeye Scoop's Alex Gleitman. He's here to answer that exact question. And Alex, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, of course, Tom. Always a pleasure.
So let's start with the guy who has been on the job for a couple days already, Justin Frye. He is replacing a guy for whom recruiting was not always the strongest suit. And it sounds like he may be having a positive impact with at least one or maybe more very big targets already.
Yeah, he's hit the ground running, picking up the phone, getting on the FaceTime, the Zooms, whatever it is. And he's going after a number of their 2023 top targets. Caden Proctor out of Iowa, Samson Okunlola out of Massachusetts, Chase Besantis out of New Jersey, Olin, I don't want to butcher his last name, but big European offensive lineman out in Connecticut. He's also talking to probably as we speak. So he's really hit pretty much their top hit list. Obviously Peyton Kirkland as well in that mix. So, we're talking about guys who are arguably, whether they're guards or tackles or whatever, the top at their position in the entire country. And he's hitting the ground, going after them hard, trying to build that relationship. And it's definitely a good start. Let's just say that.
Ohio State, it seems like they were kind of in the running for Caden Proctor and had sort of been fading recently. Do you get the sense? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I would agree with that. I think not landing Xavier Wampa hurts a little bit. They're teammates and pretty close. And I think not that they're not making, I think they're both making independent decisions, but having Wampa at Ohio State certainly would have helped Ohio State's case a lot more. I mean, look, I think you could probably look at any coach and they have their strong suits and not strong suits. I think Stud I love how Bill Green always puts it. He was an above average to good developer of talent and O-line coach, and he was a below average recruiter. I don't think we need to sugarcoat it. And, not that he did anything wrong with Caden Proctor, but I just don't think he brought some sort of value that was exciting Caden Proctor about Ohio State. His interest in Ohio State was because it's Ohio State. And so I think you bring in a younger, energetic guy in Justin Frye who could probably relate to him a little bit better and is going to be more active in his recruitment of him. I just think it's going to be a huge net positive for Ohio State. The first conversation went really well. I expect Caden Proctor to probably visit sometime in the next few months. I'm sure Frye will be out to see him on the road sometime in the next few weeks. Because I know he's out next week seeing a bunch of guys. So I just think that, I think where you were going with that, Tom, is this going to help Ohio State, this coaching change? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. Now, I would still probably have Iowa as the favorite to land him. They obviously have done a great job with offensive linemen throughout the years and have proven they can put an offensive lineman. I mean, Tyler Linderbaum will probably be a top 10 pick in this year's draft, hopefully to the Jets. And it's home and Wampa is there. So that helps them, a big time 5-star guy going to Iowa, showing that it can be done. So I think they're still going to be tough to beat, but I think Justin Frye gives Ohio State a better chance than Greg Studrawa.
And Alex's deep, dark, dirty secret is that he is a Jets fan, just like I am a Mets fan. We all have our secret shames, mostly involving crappy New York sports teams. So that's why Alex has his fingers crossed for the Jets there. Frye has not worked at a program on Ohio State's level before. I mean, he's been at Boston College, he's been at UCLA, he's recruited at the Power 5 level, but he hasn't had to recruit to the Ohio State level yet. Do you have any kind of sense for what kind of recruiter he really is? I mean, it sounds like, fairly youthful and energetic is probably a good start there.
Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. He's a younger guy. He was in college when I was. He's probably got to be about I don't know his exact age. He's I'm 30, about to be 35. He's probably got to be like 30, 37-ish, 38, maybe at the latest, at the oldest. So he's a young guy. He can relate to these kids. I think that's very important, being able to build that relationship and be able to relate to them. Stud, this is not a knock on Stud. He wasn't old, but he was a little bit older and he had some back problems and things like that. And that doesn't help. The last thing you want to do is get up and get on a plane and get in a car and drive around and see all these kids when you got, back issues. So you're not going to have those issues with Frye, and he's going to get up every day. He's going to be extremely motivated. He's hungry. I mean, Stud at this point in his career, a guy like that, they're not going to be head coach of a college football team, but Justin Frye, I think, has those aspirations, and that probably fuels him every single day to get up and do the job both on the field and on the recruiting trail. So I think that's first and foremost. And then, my experience with him, being out East, I heard a lot when he was at Boston College, just a lot of really good things about him, through recruits and through coaches and just through people who knew it. And I've spoken to some people who were in that Boston College program. I've spoken to, someone out West who's familiar with covering a lot of the kids out there that end up going to UCLA. And I know he hasn't necessarily nailed 5 stars and this and that at BC and UCLA, but everyone just speaks extremely highly of the guy. Someone I know who knew him at Boston College said that, they think he's a future head coach one day, and he just got that whatever it is. I heard those things about Ryan Day. You heard those things about Jeff Hafley when he was at Ohio State. And I'm not saying this is going to happen in 2 years or 3 years or even 5 years for Justin Frye, but I think kind of that collision course he's on is going to be, one day being a head coach. And I think to have those traits, you need to be a dynamic recruiter. And I think having the Ohio State brand behind him is only going to help him even more. So we'll see. I mean, we got to see what the results are, but I think, I'm not expecting him to go pull like, the kids in Florida or Texas or LSU at a regular pace. But I think when you look at some of the guys that you feel like maybe have slipped through the cracks that they had leads on at some point through the process, I don't think that that's going to happen anymore necessarily.
Well, the other guys who were let go on Thursday were both guys who had pretty strong track records in recruiting. So we're kind of having a different conversation here. Kerry Coombs, I guess let's start with him. First and foremost, really known as a great recruiter more than almost anything else when people talked about him. Is there any concern that him moving on might impact either any of the guys on the current roster or any of the guys in, who he was involved with in signing in the 2022 class?
I don't think the 2022 class, I think obviously they'll be disappointed, but they're just going to come in and they're going to, take to it and see how it goes and go from there. I think when you look at the guys on the roster, I don't think it's like an automatic, Kerry Coombs is gone, so I'm gone. But I think some guys who might have been on the fence a little bit or kind of been like, let's see where I'm at after spring ball. I mean, that could push them over the edge. I don't want to throw out names because I don't think that that's necessarily fair, but you could probably look at, where the depth chart is and the guys who are going to be going on year 3 or whatnot. And if they're not going to get on the field and start, and the guy who recruited them maybe not recruited them, but has been their position coach at least the last 2 years and things of that nature, that they've grown to trust and whatnot. Maybe it is best for them to move on. I hope not. I hope everyone stays. And, maybe it's a good thing in some cases where the new staff just clicks better with certain players and the light comes on, or they, the new system helps them to their skill set. So we'll see. I think it's certainly possible. I think it's more likely that guys who have been on the roster for a couple of years are more likely to maybe leave, and they were probably thinking about it already. But I don't think that the guys who just signed necessarily are going to go. I don't think that's the case.
The next question that I have to ask you then is about 2023 cornerback AJ Harris. He is someone who we saw working very closely with Coombs at camp last summer. Seemed to have a very close relationship with Coombs. By all indications, that was the case, both in person and just they got along really well. They really seemed to click when Harris was up at Ohio State camp last year. Is this something that's going to hurt Ohio State's chances to land him for next year?
Yeah, I do. I think they're not dead in the water, but I think he was going to commit on January 11th this week, and it was going to be to Ohio State. And I think there was just too many question marks with Ohio State. And then you look at some of his other, George is in the mix. Their DB coach might be leaving. Clemson, I mean, their staff was completely decimated. Brent Venables left. They lost a couple other coaches. Mike Reed is still there, but they lost a couple other coaches. I mean, Notre Dame, I don't think they're going to get him, but their staff has certainly changed and will continue to change. So I think UNC has been pretty solid. UNC fired their defensive coordinator too, and that was a school. I mean, Dre Bly is going to stay, so I don't think that matters too much. But bottom line is, it wasn't just Ohio State. All the other schools were kind of going through changes, but I do think it was going to be Ohio State, and I think a big reason for that was Kerry Coombs. They didn't really, from talking to people around that recruitment, they didn't really flinch that much when Matt Barnes left. But I got a lot of questions about it. Do I think Kerry Coombs is going to come back? And and then they moved the decision back when it's really in flux, and now he's not back. And I think that's a big loss. So what I know about AJ Harris is he's planning on moving his decision, I think, to like March at the earliest. I think their goal is to kind of build relationships with all the new coaches, not go back to square one. I think they're going to kind of keep that same set of schools, because they didn't pick that school for a coach. They picked those schools for other reasons, for everything else that they can offer. But I do think it's important that he has a good relationship with his coach. So I think it's going to be important for, the guys that Ohio State's bringing in the secondary, as well as Jim Knowles, to kind of get on the horse and get a relationship with AJ Harris going.
And then you mentioned the change at Notre Dame, and the change at Notre Dame is a very interesting one because their defensive line coach went to Michigan. So now there's an opening for a defensive line coach at Notre Dame. A couple folks on staff have kind of heard little rumblings about like maybe Al Washington fits there, or that's at least a conversation that could happen. That raises some interesting questions on the linebacker front, because if Al Washington goes to Notre Dame now, because he's not at Ohio State anymore. So he just brought in a fantastic class: CJ Hicks, Sonny Styles, Gabe Powers. I mean, is there any concern with any of them potentially leaving, especially if Washington ends up taking a job at Notre Dame? Is that at all a concern, or not really?
No, not at all. I think, those guys are Buckeye. Like CJ Hicks isn't a Buckeye because of Al Washington. Same with Gabe Powers. And I really don't think Sonny Styles. It is ironic, Styles worked out with Coombs, he worked out with Washington, he worked out with Larry Johnson. Only one of those guys is back. But I don't think Sonny Styles picked Ohio State because of any of those guys. I think he picked it for a lot of other reasons. And I know like an Al going to Notre Dame could be interesting. Those guys just signed. They're not going anywhere, in my opinion. Certainly not Powers and Hicks. I really don't think Styles. I think if anything, actually probably the switch to Jim Knowles is probably even better for Sonny Styles in the way that they can use him. So I think they're good there. I think, just like with Kerry Coombs, I think the more concern is guys that were either already on the roster and again, entering year 3, 4, whatnot, that haven't gotten on the field, but you probably have to give the new system a shot with Knowles coaching the linebackers. Maybe you're a Leo now, maybe they use you in some different ways. But I also think more so is 2023 guys, is a guy like Troy Bowles, who was pretty much on the verge of committing to Ohio State at some point, probably in the next 3 or 4 months. Does he have to take a step back now, because the guys who were recruiting him, for the most part, on the defensive side of the ball, really aren't there anymore. So I think that's where you're going to see it. But I think Kerry Coombs has a bigger impact on recruiting than Al Washington does.
So those are the guys who are out. Now let's talk about the guys who are coming in. Perry Eliano has obviously been recruiting for Cincinnati and has done a fantastic job. And again, I'm going to be talking to Mick tomorrow about him, a little bit more of a deep dive on him as a recruiter and a developer. But, the interesting question to me is Tim Walton. Tim Walton was a former Ohio State captain. He was on the 1993 Big Ten championship team and he coached under Nick Saban at LSU for a while. He's coached in college before, but he's been in the NFL since 2008. So that is a long time since he has had to get on the phone and start calling high school kids or texting high school kids about, please come to my school. So, are there any concerns about how he'll adjust to having to recruit in a very different environment than it was the last time he was coaching in college? Like a lot of the recruiting game has changed in the last 13 years or so. Is that a concern, or is that just kind of like he'll figure it out?
I think he'll figure it out over time, but I don't think they got him because he's going to be a dynamic recruiter for them. I think they got him because they think he's going to be an excellent defensive back coach. And, that's usually what NFL guys are. They don't have to recruit. So they're really good at actually coaching the positions. And I think the formula was always going to be in the defensive secondary. Not that Perry Eliano isn't a good coach, don't get me wrong there, but I think it was always going to be get a guy who is almost like a Combs Barnes tandem. Get a guy who's going to be a dynamic recruiter. Doesn't mean he can't be a good position coach. And then get a guy who's just a really, really good position coach that can get that secondary right. And I think that they have that combination. Now, the other thing I'll say is Tim Walton's not coming in and recruiting for Indiana. He's not coming in and recruiting for Florida State or Florida or LSU. He went to Ohio State. He was a co-captain at Ohio State. This is a natural, he's passionate about Ohio State. So I think that makes it a little bit easier for him. He's authentic in talking about, Ohio State and why he loves Ohio State and why he loved Ohio State and the value of Ohio State. So I think that's going to be big for him. I do think there's probably going to be a little bit of a learning curve to some extent, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to sit there and be, his sell to me at first is going to be, I've been in the NFL this many years coaching all these guys, I'm going to get you there. And I don't know if you saw the quote, Jalen Ramsey, that's been going around. I mean, I would just throw that on the table and walk out of the room if I was him personally, because Jalen Ramsey's one of the best defensive backs in the NFL right now.
Yeah, and I was trying to pull the quote up. I was kind of hearing you tee that quote up, and I was trying to pull it up, and I didn't get it in time. But it was essentially Jalen Ramsey when he left the Jags saying, he was one of the best coaches I've ever had, period, at any level. So that's not a bad endorsement from a guy who's done some stuff in the NFL. He's worked out okay his pro career. So that was Alex. Appreciate you joining me. That was I know that was kind of. Once the initial okay, who's going to be out, who's going to be in, ended, the immediate reaction was, okay, what does this mean for recruiting? Well, figured this was a good show to do. So, and I knew Alex would have some good insights on that. So Alex, thanks as always for joining me.
Yeah, of course. And I can't wait for the day when all this settles, when we can probably tell everyone on our board what really went on behind the scenes. There was a lot of moving parts there. And some guys who are gone, we thought might be staying for a while. And some guys who are staying, we thought might be gone for a while. So it's been crazy, but, glad we were able to kind of be on top of it for the most part, as much as we could be, I think. And I'm excited to see what's ahead. So we'll see.
Yeah, this has been a very eventful couple weeks since the end of the Rose Bowl, or, eventful month and a half since the end of the Michigan game. And, there have been a whole lot of different reports coming from every possible direction, and we got it right eventually. So that was a fun month, and it should be a fun month coming up. The coaching changes may or may not be done. They're not sure this staff is completely in stone yet, so we'll see whether there are any more coaching changes, and we'll see how this all plays out with recruiting and the lead up to National Signing Day on the first Wednesday in February and all of that good stuff. And then winter workouts start and spring football. And it is another year of Ohio State football. Should be plenty to talk about. So a good place to listen to us talk about that is on all of our podcasts. Alex's podcast Around the Oval is always a fantastic listen. You can find that wherever you find the Morning Scoop and Buckeye Weekly and Gives in the Bank and all those other shows. Mark and Bill dropped an episode talking about some of the same stuff we talked about today, but also just kind of overall impact of these changes. You can find that. You can find Alex's show. You can find Big Me Kickoff. You can find all those shows. Just search Buckeye Scoop wherever you're listening to this. And you can also find it on YouTube at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.